Hey guys, I'm ZSH Plays. Welcome back to Tekton Zoo. Today we're in the primates area just next to the gorillas here, and we're going to be building a habitat for the Siamang. It's so good to be back in this zoo. It's been too long. The first thing that we're going to do is just delete this wall here, and then that's going to open up the area behind it so that we can start building for the Siamang. So we've got a big area here which is basically untouched. And we're going to need quite a big area because we're going to be building our first ever monkey island, which I'm very excited about. I've dug out some of the terrain here, and we're going to keep digging and just adjusting this piece of land in the middle so that we can build the habitat for the Siamang. I'm really excited to put these guys in. I have not seen them yet. In fact, the only thing I've done with the new pack is add a leopard into the Land of the Leopard that we did a few days ago. Not touched any of the new building pieces either, so really excited to get stuck into it. I've just measured the land there by putting some null barriers in just so that we can make sure we've got enough space for these guys. The Siamang spend almost all their time up in the trees, so they don't need a huge amount of land area. You've just got to make sure that it's absolutely full of climbing. Now, as soon as Frontier announced the conservation pack, I knew that the Siamang would be the first new animal to go into Tekton Zoo. We might get to some of the others at some point, I'm not sure. We don't have a great deal of space left, but and I'm sure you guys have been wanting a gibbon in the game for a very long time. So I decided to do a monkey island because I've never done one before, and that is pretty much the most popular way to keep monkeys in modern zoos. So I figured this is one of Tekton's newer exhibits. So I'm going to start doing a bit of decorating on the island while our mechanic starts researching these new brachiation climbing frames, which I did not realise I would need to research. I love this new grass. It's amazing, and it's called Yorkshire fog grass, which is great because that is where I live. So that's very apt. I'll be mixing it in with some periwinkle grass as always. And just making this island as attractive as possible, and then we'll move on to the new climbing frames. These, I'm not even sure how we are supposed to work with these. They seem to auto connect to each other, and they're obviously supposed to be on more than one level, but I didn't really find an easy way of getting them up onto another level. So there's been a lot of sort of fiddling about to get these to work, but I really enjoyed working with them despite the difficulties. It's great to have like a completely new type of piece in the game that's going to enable a behavior that we've never seen before. And as always, I did my research. I discovered a couple of things. Firstly, that you shouldn't make climbing frames for gibbons out of metal. It causes like frostbite if it's really cold. They can slip off them, etc. That was according to the animal care manual for Siamangs in Australia, and Australian zoos are full of Siamangs, so they should know what they're talking about. So that's kind of ironic, but hey, this is Tekton Zoo. Everything's made out of either metal or concrete, so it suits the style of the zoo perfectly. Obviously, I'm going to be colouring it white in a second. We're going to have a really Tekton-y sort of feel to this climbing frame without really having to do anything. And the second thing I did was look at loads of Siamang habitats in real zoos to see sort of what kind of thing we should be going for. And one of the ones I saw, it's probably not the most attractive one I saw because it's in England and it's really hard to do outdoor tropical sort of environments when you're in England. But I really liked the layout and the way it worked, which was the Siamang Island at Twycross Zoo. And the way they do it is that the shelter or the indoor quarters for the animals, which obviously are vital in a UK zoo with the temperatures that we get, were outside the island, and then all their trees etc. were on the island, and then there was ropes leading from little hatch in the side of their shelter over the water onto the island so that the gibbons actually sort of swing out of their habitat and then onto their island, and I absolutely loved that idea. So I'm recreating that here. It doesn't look anything like the enclosure at Twycross, but in terms of the concept of the design, it's the same thing. So this climbing frame is leading over to where their shelter's going to be, and hopefully they're going to brachiate out of that shelter and onto the island. Sorry about the huge wait between Tekton episodes again. It's fair to say the wetlands has got a bit out of hand. Apart from how much I'm enjoying building in that zoo, I think it was originally going to be like 6 episodes, but I realised I really didn't want to just add all the wetlands DLC animals into a tiny little zoo and then call it a day. I really want it to be like a proper zoo, hence the extra episodes and the other animals that we've put in there. I really hope you're liking that series. Now, sorry if you're more interested in Tecton, but there is just one more episode of the wetlands to go, which is going to be the alligator walkthrough, which should be out next weekend. I'll do a tour, and then that is the wetlands done, and we can get back to Tecton as the main focus of the channel. And something very exciting in the new conservation pack in terms of Tecton is this stuff, new concrete, or what I thought was new concrete. Turns out it's 3D printed as it's described in the game. I don't know a lot about 3D printing, but I think it uses some sort of plastic polymer or something like that. Definitely not concrete. I don't think that would be a very suitable material. So I'm guessing this isn't actually concrete, but it looks a lot like the sort of textured concrete that was big in the 1960s and 70s. Lots of, well, not a lot, but quite a bit of stuff like this in London Zoo and places like that. So I'm very happy to get this into the game, and it's going to be, along with the plaster, yet another piece that we call concrete, even though it isn't. So that's what the shelter is going to be made out of. This is just roughing out here, and then we're going to get the barriers in. Again, this whole habitat is going to be null barriers as usual. Just going to get those around the water to get the shape in. And then we're going to put the habitat gate in. I put it in the shelter first of all, and then realised that the keepers needed some way to get onto the island, and swinging along the climbing frame was probably not the way to do it. So we're going to move that in a bit, just to the side here, and then we'll build a bridge for the keepers to walk over so they can get onto the island. And then we're going to surround the habitat gate with hot wire and then some rocks, just to make sure that the gibbons don't get out. Going to make quite a big bridge here. I'd rather it was smaller, but it needs to be really wide for the keepers to reliably walk over it in the game. So make quite a big one and just make it out of rocks so that it looks a bit more natural. But to be honest, you can't see it from where the guests are going to be. Obviously, as you can see, we're right at the border of the zoo here, so there's not going to be any guests at the back. It's just a little path here for the staff. And the guests will always be on the other side where you can see people walk in there now. So let's get back to the shelter. I want a raised sleeping area inside for them because they always sleep up in the trees. So we're going to build like an extension to the side of it, which also makes it a more interesting shape. And again, more of this new 3D printed material to build the roof. And the little turret there is where the gibbons are going to get in and out of the shelter. And we're going to cover this roof up with some of the new bio roofs later on as well. That's another cool little addition to the game. Most of the buildings in this zoo have bio roofs, as you know, so having another option of making those easily is cool. These are the sleeping, I don't know what you call them, platforms, I guess, for the gibbons. Just going to put some bedding material on there, and I want to design it so that on the inside there's bedding and some toy enrichment, and then on the island there'll be more toy enrichment, all the food enrichment, and obviously all the climbing. So that gives the gibbons a reasons to go from the island to inside, and from up on the climbing frame to down on the floor, which will hopefully encourage them to spend their time sort of brachiating around the habitat. Because we're in franchise mode and the Siamang do not like long grass, I'm using a lot of the in-game grasses to cover up the terrain and make it look more interesting. Put some concrete in here to make the island look a bit more man-made. I actually built this for an earlier version of the habitat when there was just going to be a moat, and then I removed it, but happily it still fit the island once I changed my plans, so just put that back in there. That's just the plaster tower pieces laid along the floor, and when you sink them in you get a really nice smooth concrete edge. And blueprinting is something I'm doing a lot more of recently. I think it was Beezy who told me to do that. Every time you build something that you might ever see yourself using again, save it as a blueprint. If you build a nice pile of rocks, save it as a blueprint, and then if you ever need a pile of rocks again, which you always will, you've already got one blueprinted. You don't have to make one from scratch. It saves you so much time when building. And yeah, that's why I blueprinted that moat in case I ever needed it again. And 2 hours later, I needed it again. Put a sign on the habitat as always. Decided to have this one sort of three-dimensional, so using the little 2D text trick to make that look better, and then just copy the 2D text in front and behind itself to make it look 3D. Put a column in here to give some support to the sleeping quarters, a bit of moss to line the edge of the water for realism. Got some of the new sort of slat pieces on the walls. I really like these pieces. They're not particularly Tecton, but again, the sort of vibe that I'm going for here is that this shelter is an older building in the zoo, which is then being repurposed to go with this new Siamang island. You see this in a lot of zoos where they've got like an older building that maybe they would rather replace, but they can't afford to, and rather than knock it down, when they want to repurpose it for a different use, what they'll do is maybe cover it in more modern wood and plants and things like that, so it sits in nicely with the newer parts of the zoo rather than knocking it down and starting again. And then the final thing to do is to use the new 0.5 meter billboard to make tiny little signs for the side of the habitat. I really like this. I've wanted smaller signs for absolutely ages. That is the Siamang Island completed. I really hope you like it. Thank you for watching as always, and I will see you very soon. Bye.